So, since the Realm of the Mad God private server community has transformed into a mere shell of what it used to be, and the most hyped private server's Elven Realm, I've decided to make a simple beginner's guide to what is in my opinion the only good private server that is online as of now, Valor. Now Valor is one of the OG private servers that has been running for a very long time, and I myself joined somewhere in 2017, so I would say that I'm capable of making a simple beginner's guide to all the newcomers. This guide will mostly talk about general new content that will help in the early game, but will also touch on some of the endgame content so you know what you're getting into. New systems and mechanics. Valor takes the Realm of the Mad God experience in its simplest form and adds a large amount of content onto that. The early game will be like most other private servers, but you will quickly run into new systems and mechanics that Valor provides. Let's first talk about stats. There are normally 8 stats that you can max in Realm of the Mad God, but Valor provides a whole 4 new stats. These include Restoration, Protection, Might, and Luck. These 4 new stats provide new ways of playing. Restoration or Rest will increase the amount of healing a consumable will give you, like for example a normal HP pot and an MP pot. Prot or Protection will give you a shield that blocks incoming damage before it takes away at your health. The higher Prot stat, the more shield you have. Your shield will regenerate each time your surge hits 100. You get surge by killing any enemy, which corresponds to 2 surge per enemy. Surge can also benefit certain weapons, but those are required much later on into your gameplay. While being 2 different stats, Luck and Might are closely dependent on each other. The 2 stats provide the new crit mechanic in Valor. For every 10 Luck, you gain 1 crit chance. This will cap at a 100% chance at 1000 Luck. Might will also increase how effective the crit will be. For every 7 Might you have, you gain 0.1 bonus critical strike damage. The Gambler class is the class that uses Luck and Might to the fullest, while other classes may benefit greatly from these stats. They're not too important, but they're a great source of extra damage. Maxing 12 out of 12 is not the end of the journey. When you're 12 out of 12, you can consume a Law Scripture 2, which will let you consume Vials, to increase every stat further by 10 points. Vials are dropped from raids, which are an endgame activity. You can also increase your power by consuming a Law Scripture 1, which will allow you to put notes with benefits and different stats on your character. These notes can be purchased by onranes. Now is probably a good time to talk about currency and what onranes even are. Currency, gold, fame, and onrane. Most private servers will run their community on fame, but not Valor. Valor has opted to run its economy on gold. This has provided a new feel compared to other private servers and prevents fame exploits from ruining the economy. Gold can be obtained from various dungeons in forms of gold caches, which will grant either 250 gold, 500 gold, or 750 gold per cache. In the start of Valor, you should focus on maxing your characters and try to obtain some UTs by yourself, as the economy is a lot more late mid-game to end-game content. Now let's talk about Valor's own currency, onranes. Now onranes are mostly used in crafting legendary items and buying nodes with. Onranes are also used to open elite boxes, which can drop from raids. You won't need onranes in the early game, so selling them on the market might be a quick way to make a buck in the start, since endgame players will need a lot of them. Fame is not as important on Valor as other private servers, so you should just focus on making some gold. Oh yeah, and Valor has a marketplace where you can sell and buy items, if that wasn't obvious by now. Now I mentioned the Gambler class before, so let's quickly look at the new classes. Classes galore. Valor provides 7 new classes to play, and yes, the Samurai is a new class since it was added before the Samurai class was added in prod, so it behaves differently. Most of these classes are easy to figure out, so I won't bother explaining them other than the Drag. The Drag's ability drains 1 HP, and the more HP you drain, the more damage it deals when you let it rip.
Beyblade, Beyblade, let it rip!
I would not recommend this class for beginners, as it's very easy to die if you don't have decent gear. Normal and Elite accounts. When creating an account on Valor, you can choose 2 different account types. There's the normal account and there's the Elite account. The normal account basically has everything that I've talked about in this video so far, and that is the account type I will mostly be going in depth with. But you can also choose to create an Elite account. This is not recommended for new players, as it's a more kind of hardcore version of Valor, which places special restrictions on your account. This is more so made for the veterans or the people who want an extra challenge, but I'll still include it in this video if you're confused about that option. In short, the Elite account is unable to trade or use the market, therefore making it a more kind of single player experience, but still playing with other players. You're just not using the economy at all. Now, while having these restrictions, the Elite account also does gain some benefits, like instead of using gold for a lot of things, they can use onrane instead. If you want the extra challenge, you can create an Elite account, but I definitely recommend playing Valor without it first and then learning the mechanics, and then you can go to an Elite account if you really want to try the challenge. Dungeons and events. What to do. With every private server comes new dungeons and events, but it's sometimes hard to know what you're capable of doing in the start of the game. When talking about events, I would say that most long range classes have no problem in doing every single event that the realm has to offer. Some of the events can be very tough, like dealing 200 damage shots, but most events will be pretty easy if you figure out their movement pattern. Now, close range classes might suffer a bit while trying to defeat the high tier event bosses, so being a long range class is the safer option. Now, even though you can defeat most of the event bosses, that doesn't mean that you can do all the dungeons. A lot of the event bosses will drop some fairly easy dungeons, which you can gain some valuable stuff from, but some of the higher tier event bosses will drop some very hard dungeons, which you shouldn't consider going into. Some of the new dungeons that Valor provides that I specifically recommend for new players are the Storm Palace, Tunnel of Pain, Heavenly Rift, Elemental Ruins, and Galactic Plateau. Let's first start off with the Storm Palace. The Storm Palace is dropped by the Thunder God in the Godlands, and has a fairly high drop chance. The dungeon itself is pretty easy to rush. You just need to watch out for the little yellow guys because they will paralyze you, and that is very lethal. The dungeon does also have a second boss, so you can get double loot in this dungeon. The Storm Palace is also the main way of obtaining luck potions. The drops in this dungeon are the Ring of the Storms, the Stormbreaker Shield, the Dagger of Unearthly Storms, and the Typhoon Wand. Both the Ring, Dagger and Wand are pretty great early on, and the shield also grants you a whole 12 dexterity. Overall, this dungeon is pretty easy, but you just have to watch out for the paralyze shots, as the boss will also paralyze you and then try to sit on you. If you get paralyzed, I suggest nexusing and trying again. The next dungeon is the Tunnel of Pain. Now, since this dungeon got reworked, it's kinda hard to rush being an early game player. There's a lot of dangers that you can run into while rushing this, so I recommend getting a higher tier player to rush this for you. I don't recommend clearing out this dungeon, as it's just not worth the time. This dungeon will drop from the Beholder in the Godlands. The white bag drops from this dungeon are the Nether Blade, the Staff of Dark Malediction, the Shadow Beacon, and the Soul Reaper armor. All of these items are pretty great, specifically the Staff and the Nether Blade. The boss itself is very easy since it's stationary, and once you learn the shot pattern, it's pretty easy to avoid. This dungeon is also the main way of getting restoration. Now onto the Heavenly Rift. The Heavenly Rift is pretty much the easiest Godland dungeon that there is. It drops from the Angelic Commander, which is in the Godlands. Rushing this dungeon takes no effort at all, and the minions barely do any damage. The white bags that you can obtain from this dungeon is the Spectrum Robe, the Sheath of Holy Revival, and the Eternity Armor. These white bags aren't all that great, but the Spectrum Robe can be okay in the early game. This dungeon also drops chops, so it might be a good way to upgrade your gear. Now onto the Elemental Ruins. This dungeon drops from the Elemental Phantom, which is an event boss. Rushing this dungeon is very easy, but it's a pretty long rush, so you just have to be patient. The white bags in this dungeon are a wand that has 15.6 tiles range, a pretty good tome which also removes all negative conditions like the prairie, and the Earthbound Lands. This dungeon also gives restoration and mana pots. Boss fight itself can be a bit tough, but it's pretty easy to avoid all the shots. The Galactic Plateau. This dungeon drops from the Mothership, which is in another event. This is definitely one of the Valor OG dungeons. In this dungeon, you first have to kill the Overseer and then go around clearing these pillars in the dungeon. Once you've done that, you activate the second boss, which is definitely the main entrance of this dungeon. The second boss can drop the ET experience, which is a great bow for early on and even kinda late game. This dungeon also gives some starting gold, so it's definitely worth doing. Now all of this will cover most of the beginner content in Valor, but I still want to explain a bit about the end game that Valor provides. Raids. Doing raids is one of the in-game activities you'll be doing in Valor. Raids are like a dungeon that include multiple bosses and arenas to fight them in. You go from portal to portal and traverse the dangers that lay within. Each raid contains 4 different bosses, and each having their own mechanic. Some of the bosses are just damage sponges that do a whole lot of damage, while others require unique mechanics to defeat the bosses. There are currently 3 different raids to complete. A raid is activated by someone using a raid token dropped by Oryx. Raid dungeons can also appear in the realm when you defeat the corresponding raid event. Raids mostly happen when there's a lot of players online, as doing it in a small group is very tough with certain bosses and areas. As a new player, you won't get much loot from raids, but getting elite boxes can be a real game changer. You have the chance to become rich with 1 box and skip directly into late mid game. But be careful, raids are easy to do when you know what you're doing, but it's very easy to die when you don't know what you're doing. Don't do raids with all of your valuable stuff and classes if you don't know anything about them. But don't lay off raids, they're a great source of elite boxes and it's something you have to do later. Legendary gear. Legendary gear is the endgame. You obtain legendary gear by crafting a legendary sword crystal with a shard or using realm essence with a number of the UTs in game to upgrade them. Sword crystals can be crafted when you obtain 50 sword crystal shards, and a legendary one can be crafted with 1 sword crystal and 100 onrane. Shards can be obtained from various bosses and elite boxes, and realm essence can be crafted by combining 2 pieces of the realm, which can be obtained by doing ascended bosses like ascended UDLs and sprite worlds. Legendary gear isn't the rarest though, AR takes that spot. Ancient relic items are dropped by specific bosses with a very low drop chance, but all of this is late game and this is a beginner's guide, so I won't go too in depth with all of this. Conclusion. This guide should hopefully get you used to all the new mechanics and stuff that Valor brings. There are of course different things that I haven't talked about, like alert bosses, which can be activated by gaining an alert which can drop from any enemy with a very low drop chance. All of these things can be found on the wiki and you can always ask another player. I'll leave a link to the Valor Discord and the Valor wiki in the description below. There is also another guide video on YouTube which goes more in depth with the whole alert bosses, so you can watch that if you want to learn more about alerts. Hope you gain some more knowledge about Valor.